What's going on, everybody? Kalipus Tech here, coming back at you with another video. In this video, we're going to be taking another look at the Samsung Galaxy S21 FE and going over whether or not it's still a good phone to buy in 2023. Now, as always, if you do end up wanting to learn more about it, definitely check out the description, where I am linking to several other videos about this phone, as well as some information about pricing, availability, and some of my favorite smartphone accessories. But with that being said, let's get into it. Now, in case you don't know, the Samsung Galaxy S21 FE is essentially an entry-level flagship phone, giving us a lot of the features and performance of a much higher-end device, while at the same time still being reasonably affordable. Now, one really cool thing about this phone is that despite originally going for around $699 factory unlocked, at this point in 2023, at least in the US, you can easily find this phone for under $400. And despite being about a year and a half old at this point, I do think it still has quite a bit to offer. Now, with this phone, we're getting a decently large 6.4-inch 120Hz dynamic AMOLED display with a 1080p resolution, a PPI of 411, and a 19.5:9 aspect ratio. So in general, we're definitely getting a great display here. On one hand, at 6.4 inches, it's not the largest display you can get, but in general, at this point in 2023, I want to say the average display is around 6.5 inches. So at 6.4, the S21 FE is still definitely not small. But aside from the size, the image quality we're getting here is really impressive. With the dynamic AMOLED, as opposed to maybe an IPS LCD, for example, the display is quite a bit brighter, the colors are a bit more rich and vibrant, and the viewing angles are a lot better. So if you're outside in the sun, for example, or really in any kind of bright area, compared to something like an IPS LCD, which is what you're typically going to find in phones around this $400 price range, the display we're getting with this phone is a lot easier to see. So in general, despite again not having the largest display you can get, if you're looking for something that has a really nice image, maybe you're doing something like watching videos, for example, where the image quality is a bit more important, or maybe you just don't really want a super large phone, whatever the case may be, if you're looking for a phone that's on one hand still decently affordable, but on the other hand is still going to be a bit more premium when it comes to the display, the S21 FE will be a great choice. Now for storage, with the Samsung Galaxy S21 FE, depending on where you get it and which version you get, you could end up with either 128GB of internal storage or 256. Now this phone in my hand, as well as the common version you're typically going to find through maybe a carrier, for example, does have 128, but just keep in mind, if you need more storage, you can also get 256. But keep in mind, the one drawback here is that with the S21 FE, unfortunately, we're not getting microSD card expansion here, which on one hand is kind of disappointing considering at this point in 2023, around this $400 price range, I want to say almost every phone is going to have microSD card expansion. So if that is more important to you, then you might want to skip this phone. But I will say, for the average user, whether you get 128GB or 256, this phone in general is most likely going to have plenty of storage for most people. Although of course there are going to be plenty of people out there who use a ton of storage. For the average user, you're probably not going to fill up 128GB anyway. So even without microSD card expansion, you'll most likely still be fine. For security features, this phone does have Face Unlock and a nice in-display fingerprint scanner. Let's give it a try. There we go, one more time. And there we go. So as you can see, real fast and responsive, no issues at all. And again, this phone does have Face Unlock too, so if you want to use that instead, you always can. Now taking a look at the camera setup here, with the S21 FE, up front, we got a 32MP selfie camera. Then on the back, we got a triple camera setup with a 12MP main camera, an 8MP telephoto lens, and a 12MP ultra-wide camera. So in general, when it comes to features, we're definitely getting a good setup here, despite technically only having a 12MP camera, as opposed to a typical mid-range phone's 40, 50, or 60. Keep in mind that with the S21 FE being more of a high-end device, the hardware here is significantly higher quality. So as a result, despite technically having lower megapixels than say a Samsung Galaxy A54 5G, for example, the photo quality with this phone is still significantly better. In addition to this, keep in mind that despite not having a dedicated macro camera, which I guess could be sort of a disadvantage, with the telephoto lens, this phone does have some pretty nice optical zoom, and because of this, you can get those close-up detailed images you typically get with the macro camera. Now they might not look quite as macro-like, but at the same time, in general, I feel like the typical mid-range macro camera isn't really the best anyway. So at the end of the day, the result you get with this camera is probably going to be better. In addition to this, for video, with the S21 FE, we're getting a max recording quality of 4K in both the rear and front cameras at 60 frames per second too. So although phones like the Samsung Galaxy A54 5G and even the A34 5G can record in 4K too, not only is the quality again not quite as good, but also keep in mind for most mid-range phones that can record 4K videos, the frame rate does max out at 30 frames per second. So with the S21 FE, if you want to record some seriously high quality videos and get nicer, smoother footage, then this phone definitely will be a great choice. Now to give you an idea of what this camera can do, here's some pictures taken with the Samsung Galaxy S21 FE. So overall, definitely great quality here. Again, compared to your typical mid-range phone, keep in mind this is more of a flagship phone, so the quality is going to be on a whole different level. And while I feel like for average use, for stuff like the occasional Instagram post every now and then things like sending photos to friends and family, or maybe you're taking vacation photos for your own memories, for stuff like that, I feel like a phone like this is on one hand definitely nice, but on the other hand not altogether necessary. I feel like for that kind of basic use, you could easily get like a $200 phone and get a similar kind of result. But at the same time, if you're really taking a lot of pictures and you want to make sure you get the best photo quality you can for the money, then an older flagship phone like this is definitely a nice choice, because despite being a bit older, it is again going to be a bit higher end than something in a similar price range. So in general, if you don't mind having a slightly older phone, the result you get will be quite a bit better. Now for the RAM and processor, with the Samsung Galaxy S21 FE, we're getting 6GB of RAM with the Qualcomm Snapdragon 888 5G processor. Now keep in mind, when it comes to the processor, there are a few different configurations here. First of all, there's another version with this same processor that has 8GB of RAM. And second of all, there is another version of this phone, I believe this is just for the international version, that has a completely different processor. I think it's like some sort of Exynos. And while I have heard things about the Exynos version overheating, since I haven't used that phone, I can't really comment on that, but just keep in mind again, the phone in this video does have the Qualcomm Snapdragon 888 5G processor. Now in general, I have found the performance on this phone to be pretty good. On one hand, if you compare it to something like the Samsung Galaxy S23 Ultra, or even something like my iPhone 13, it's not going to be nearly as fast, because again, remember, this is more of an entry-level flagship phone, so overall, it's really more meant to give you a taste of the flagship experience, while still being decently affordable. So despite being quite a bit faster than your typical mid-range phone, it's still definitely not the fastest phone out there. That being said though, I feel like for the average user, you're really not going to need anything faster than this. For typical daily activities like web browsing, social media, streaming content like videos and music, mobile gaming, and really anything you can think of, the S21 FE is definitely fast enough to do pretty much everything. Sure, again, it's not going to be as fast as like the latest flagship phone or anything like that, but again, at the same time, it will definitely get the job done. So if you're looking for a phone that has really good performance, then I feel like for the money, this is definitely one of the better options. Now I ran a benchmark test on this phone using Geekbench 6, and here are the results I got. So what I recommend doing is running this test on your current phone and then comparing your results to these, and that's going to give you a better idea of where this phone stands performance wise compared to your current device, because depending on what you have, it may or may not be faster. If you're coming from something like a Samsung Galaxy S10 for example, it might be more of a lateral move, or the S10 might be a little bit faster, I don't really remember. But then of course, if you're coming from really any kind of mid-range phone, then chances are this phone will be a significant upgrade. Now for the battery, this phone is decent but not really great. With S21 FE, we're getting a 4500 mAh battery that supports 25W fast charging, and it also has wireless charging too. So in general, again, definitely not bad here. It is nice that we're getting wireless charging, and with 25W fast charging, the charging speed will be pretty decent too. But in general, I feel like when it comes to overall battery life, again, it's definitely not that bad, but at the same time, if you're really looking for a phone that's gonna last for like days without charging, then you might be a little disappointed, because although this phone is still again pretty decent for daily use, if you're not really around a charger a lot and you have to use your phone a lot throughout the day, then you will want to get like a wireless battery pack, for example, because unlike some phones that can last like 36 or 48 hours without charging, it is going to have to charge a lot sooner. Now for the software, with S21 FE, this phone does have Android 13, and with Samsung software support, you can also expect to get Android 14, 15, and 16, so definitely quite a few updates here. And this is one reason why I feel like, despite being about a year and a half old now, I would definitely still not consider this phone outdated. Sure, there are phones out now that have slightly better features and stuff like that, but in general, I feel like compared to your average $400 or $500 phone, pretty much everything about this phone except for the battery is quite a bit better. And in addition to this, there are phones being released now that have, yeah, maybe Android 13, but at the same time, they might not be getting as many updates. So with a phone like the Motorola Moto G Stylus 5G 2023, for example, sure, it has Android 13 and it probably will eventually get Android 14, but with S21 FE, again, this phone is going to get Android 14, 15, and 16. So again, even though it is a little bit older now, if you're looking for a phone you can keep for a decent amount of time, but still get the latest Android updates, updates, I would definitely still not count this phone out. As far as other features go, this phone does have NFC, so you can use tap and pay with it just fine. And again, it does have wireless charging too, so definitely nice there. But unfortunately, this phone does not have a headphone jack, which honestly I'm definitely not surprised considering we haven't seen headphone jacks in higher end devices for years now. But just keep in mind, if you are coming from maybe a lower end device that does have a headphone jack, if you do have a normal pair of wired headphones you want to use them with this phone, you will have to get an adapter. But in conclusion, is the Samsung Galaxy S21 FE still worth buying in 2023? Overall, I would definitely say it is. Despite again being a year and a half old as of the recording of this video, this phone is definitely quite a bit more affordable than it was when it first came out, going for again around $400 or less. And compared to the average new phone around that same price, I feel like this phone is better in pretty much every way. The display, while again not being the largest, is definitely really high quality, and it does give you more of a premium kind of experience. Despite not having microSD card expansion, we're still getting plenty of internal storage here, and again, I feel like for the average user, you're probably not going to need more than like 128 gigabytes, maybe 256 if you're really a power user. So sure, there are probably some people out there who really want a microSD card, but for the average user, I feel like this is perfectly fine. This phone again has a really nice camera, great performance, really good software support despite its age, and features like NFC and wireless charging. So in general, if you're looking for a phone that's really going to give you a more premium experience, but you still want something reasonably affordable, then I would definitely say the Samsung Galaxy S21 FE is still worth considering. Now once again, if you want to learn more about this phone, definitely check out the description where I am linking to several other videos about it, as well as some information about pricing, availability, and some of my favorite smartphone accessories. But that's it for this video. If you enjoyed it and found it useful, be sure to give it a thumbs up and hit that subscribe button. Don't forget to follow Kalipis Tech on Twitter and Instagram. And as always, I will see you in the next video.